Hi everybody, glad that you're being responsible and taking care of your AP Psychology homework. So today we are talking about what leads to stereotypes and prejudice, which aligns with our learning target number 4 if you see here on the learning map. So let's get into it. So psychologists are very interested, specifically social psychologists, in studying intergroup relations. What they want to study is how we treat people who are not part of our group and how that's different from how we treat people who are actually part of our group. Basically, what they're trying to discover, like I said, is what leads to stereotypes and prejudice. So I want you to take a moment right now to think of all the groups in which you belong in. Now, if I were to do this and think about all the groups that I belong in, I would start off with probably talking about that I belong to an educator group because I'm a teacher, and I belong to the group of females because I'm a girl. I belong to a group of mothers and sisters and daughters, okay? I would think about how I'm a wife, my political affiliations. I would consider myself a Republican. I could go either way, people. Democrat, Republican, depends on the topic, all right? I think about my religious affiliation, being Lutheran. You get the idea, okay? So think of all the groups that you belong to. You can press pause right now. All right, as you thought about this, what social psychologists would consider these groups as part of our social identity. Now, if you take a look at the definition of that, our social identity refers to the way we define ourselves in terms of our group membership, which is different than our personal identity because that would be more individual kind of characteristics that we would talk about, like more of like our personalities and those types of things that make us different from other people. This is what actually ties us to other people. So how important do you consider these groups that tie you to other people? Is it something that you would include when somebody asks you, well, who are you? All right, and is it something that you would use to describe yourself? Well, I play sports, or I am European American, or whatever, okay? So there's all kinds of different types of groups according to social psychologists: ethnic groups, religious groups, political affiliation, vocations. Put in your notes under vocations, that means careers or jobs that you have. Personal relationships, and then of course stigmatized groups, okay? So why do we think of ourselves in this way socially? Now, from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense that we would think of ourselves from a social perspective because we need to know what groups we belong to and what groups we don't belong to, because that would help with survival and of course reproduction, okay? All right. We would want to be able to identify groups that we don't belong to because there could be enemies in those groups, and that could contribute to whether or not we survive or not. We want to see the enemy coming so we can club them or not club them, if that makes sense, if they're not our enemies. Likewise, evolutionary psychologists would say that social identity is also important because it tells you what groups you're in and what groups you're out of, and could provide a justification for doing terrible things like what we do to people during war. It's probably hard for somebody to kill somebody else, but if we demean somebody else and we make them seem less than human, it makes it easier, and we tend to do that for people who are in outgroups. But there are some psychologists that believe that social identity plays a bigger role, and that bigger role leads to some social issues and social problems amongst people in a society. So here's that theory. The social identity theory says that basically our identities we use as a way to measure our self-esteem. And so we need to feel good about the groups in which we belong to, because if we feel bad about the groups in which we belong to, it's a direct threat to our self-esteem. So we do things to bolster our own groups and other things to diminish the groups that we're not a part of. So what do I mean by this in-group, out-group thing that's here in your notes, okay? In-groups are groups in which you belong to, so you would think very highly of these groups to make yourself feel better. Out-groups are groups that you don't belong to, and so you would think about the differences from these groups to your groups, and you would really kind of try to downplay the out-groups, otherwise it would attack your self-esteem. Okay, so when we start thinking in terms of in-group and out-group, we start thinking of a very us versus them kind of mentality. And when we start thinking in an us versus them kind of mentality, that leads us to favor our own group. And favoritism of our own group can lead to what social psychologists call ethnocentrism. By definition, ethnocentrism is a tendency for us to favor our own ethnic group over other groups. Now, the reason why this is problematic, you want to put down in your notes, is because what ends up happening is we tend to think negatively about our out-group or ethnicities that we don't belong to versus the ethnicities that we, or ethnicity, well, I guess it could be ethnicities that we do belong to, okay? Which then leads to prejudice, okay? Now, prejudice, remember, is an attitude or a belief that people have that's negative about people that are in their out-groups, okay? There's two different types of prejudice. There's explicit and there's implicit. Now, and there's all different types of prejudice too, by the way. You can have prejudice for race, you can have prejudice for gender, you can have prejudice for skinny people versus obese people. Like, there's all kinds of isms, if you will, out there, okay? Now, explicit prejudice is being conscious and open to sharing that belief or that feeling that you have about a particular outgroup. Implicit prejudice has to do with having attitudes on a deeper, more hidden level. You might not even know that you have prejudice for certain groups that you're not a part of. Okay? So what psychologists are interested in is they're interested in both of these types of prejudice and measuring these types of prejudice in individuals. It's very easy to get at explicit racism. You can ask people their opinions about things, like through surveys or something like that, but how do you get at implicit racism? Pondering? Well, social psychologists have devised a way to get at implicit racism. They've devised a test called the implicit association test, and here's how it works. And you can try to take this too. It's very interesting, and you can see if you actually have some implicit racism hidden deep within inside of you, or some implicit gender prejudice by chance or something like that. So what they do is they show you images or words, and you have to associate them with good or bad. And based on how quickly you do this, this will get at your implicit feelings. It's basically like your gut reaction to things, if that makes sense. And that's how they try to get at that, those implicit prejudice. All right, so here's a big question. Which is worse, explicit or implicit? Well, the answer is both, of course, because both of them can lead to discrimination. Now remember, discrimination is different than prejudice. Prejudice is an attitude or a belief. Discrimination is an action. And this is where we actually try to prevent or bar people from doing things based on their out-group affiliation. And we know what kind of problems that leads to historically. I don't need to spend time on that. So, why do we care about all this? Why do we care about this social identity theory that basically says when we classify ourselves in in-groups and out-groups, it can lead to prejudice, which then can lead to discrimination? Why does all this matter? Another question to ponder here. Wait time. I'm not very good at it. Pause me. So, anyways, The reason why is if we can figure out what leads to prejudice and then of course potentially discrimination, we can maybe help to prevent it or find ways to decrease it or diminish it to improve people's existence in society. So why do people develop the prejudice? Why do people do this in-group, out-group sort of classification? All right? Well, first of all, competition between groups can create prejudice, all right? Can create these negative feelings about out-groups because you have these, oh, crap, hold on. Ah, pause. Okay, sweet, unpause. All right, sorry, I had a visitor. All right, so, anyways, so why do people develop prejudice? Well, many social psychologists believe that when there's competition between groups, that can breed prejudice. Specifically like economic competition, like competition for jobs and scarce resources, that can cause people to have these negative feelings towards people that aren't a part of their in-groups. Likewise, just like the Bobo doll experiment, cultural learning, when we are in a culture where we see other people have negative attitudes about people that are in their out groups, okay? Or we have that as part of our norms in our culture, that can lead to prejudice. It's acceptable to say things like that are negative against people that are in the out groups. And this has to do with the social desirability factor. You want to get down in your notes that the social desirability factor has to do with us wanting to be liked. It's the whole idea of normative social influence. It's the same thing. We like people to like us, so we'll do things that they do so that they like us. We also can develop prejudice because of the whole social identity theory. It makes us feel better to think poorly about other groups. At least we're not as bad as those guys, okay? Because of the concept of social comparison. And lastly, we're lazy. Remember about heuristics, which are shortcuts. It's very easy to lump someone into a stereotype and to have negative feelings about them because you've lumped them into this stereotype, okay? And not really take the time to get to know them. So, I want you to take a few minutes here and I want you to answer these questions. I hope that they're in your notes, all right? And that hopefully will give you some practice with some of the things that we've been talking about. I'm going to pause this and I'll be right back. Hi, and we're back. So, what were your answers? All right, for answer for number 1, you should have said something about how social identity is a crucial part of our self-image and a valuable source for positive feelings about ourselves. And so we may use that to boost our self-esteem. All right. Answer to number 2, you should have talked about the definition of prejudice and had 2 real or historical examples. You could have talked about the ethnic cleansing that took place in Africa between the Hutus and the Tutsis. Maybe you could have talked about the civil rights movement here in the United States. There's lots of historical and real-world examples that you could talk about. And then number 3, you should have talked about how it would be important to know this so that we can maybe try to eliminate and reduce prejudice in society. All right. So, of course, social psychologists have thought about this and thought about ways to improve intergroup relations. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about doing things like what Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of. Oh shoot, I forgot to turn on the...
It's a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I
totally wrecked that.
That one day, this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
Doesn't he just give you chills?
We always choose to be self-evident
Okay, so you get the idea here. How can we eliminate prejudice, of course, which is something that's really hard to do because we're talking about changing attitudes and beliefs of people. All right, so what social psychologists have discovered is that the ways that we can do this is, first of all, we can create, hi, I'm gonna move me, maybe me right here is good. All right, we can create situations where people begin to know each other better. What that does is that eliminates that heuristic that we tend to use because we're lazy. Remember, it's easier to lump people into a stereotype and then have these negative feelings about them because they're not in your in-group, okay, than it would be to actually sit down and get to know people. So if we make people get to know each other, then we can start to reduce prejudice that way. Now, I think one of the greatest movies that's ever been done to talk about how to improve intergroup relations is, of course, Disney's Remember the Titans. So, as you're watching this video clip, I'd like you to think about the ways in which Coach Boone tried to get people to know each other better to help reduce prejudice.
All right, listen up, listen up. I want everybody off the bus. Let's go.
By the way, if you haven't seen this movie, this is based in the 1950s during the time of segregation in the United States. And this is a school that was being integrated, black and white, at a time when schools were all separated. And so Coach Boone is the coach of the high school football team, and he has football players that are black and white, and they are going to camp. And right now, they've segregated themselves in 2 separate buses. And he's going to take control of the situation and then give them some other directives of how to get to know each other better. Watch.
Follow me, everybody. Let's go right now. All right. Everybody off the bus. Listen up. I don't care if you're black, green, blue, white, or orange. I want all of my defensive players on this side, all players going out for offense over here. Right now. Let's move. Let's move. Let's move. Let's move. You and you, offensive bus, sit together. You and you, defensive bus, sit together. Get comfortable, too. Because the person that I have you sitting next to is the same one that you'll be rooming with for the duration of this camp.
Cause baby, there ain't no mountain high enough, ain't no valley low enough.
Blue, shut up. I don't want to see your smiling, shuffling here on your minstrel show singing on this bus.
You too. Got that right.
You can shut up too.
Some of the greatest music in this movie, too.
That's my bed. And that's his bed.
I ain't looking at that for 2 weeks, man. Take it down.
You can close your eyes for 2 weeks, all I care. Don't you look at your wall and I look at mine.
I'll look wherever I want to, and I don't want to be looking at that for 2 weeks.
And you better use your X-ray vision, Superman, and look right through it, because it ain't coming down.
Hold on, I have another visitor. Give me 1 second. Pause. And I'm back. I know you were worried. Okay, so after you were watching the video, you should have seen that there are ways that Coach Boone tried to create situations where each group had to get to know people from the other group better. Okay? Now, the first thing that you should have saw was that he made people sit in buses together, and they had to sit black and white together in the seats. They also had to room with people that were not in their in-group. Now, if you know the movie, Coach Boone also does some other things. He forces the players to eat lunch with each other who are not in the same in-groups. He forces them to get to know people who are not in their in-groups. They have to like find out about their parents, and they have to ask them what their likes are and their dislikes are, and get to know them on a personal level. Now, if you notice though, sitting together on the bus, rooming together, getting to know each other didn't exactly improve the intergroup relations, all right? So you're gonna have to move beyond that, and you're gonna have to do more things to improve intergroup relations. What social psychologists have found is that people need to start thinking in their own heads that they're of equal status with people that are in their outgroups. It also helps when authority figures tell people that they need to have positive relationships. Coach Boone does that in the movie constantly. If people in different in-groups believe that a friendship could emerge from the interaction that they're having, it could also help to increase the relationship and decrease prejudice. Now let's think about these two things that I just got done talking about here. Why would an authority figure telling you that you're going to have a positive relationship help to improve intergroup relations? Are you thinking about it? Of course, you have to go back to Milgram, right? The Milgram experiment here. All right, next question for you. How could you knowing that a friendship could come out of this help to improve intergroup relations? Well, the answer, of course, is thinking about that whole idea that we learned about with attraction. If we know that somebody likes us, okay, and that we might get a friendship out of the deal, we're more likely to like that person too, all right? And the last thing, this is very, very interesting. What social psychologists have discovered is that when we engage people in outgroups together with some sort of cooperative task, what happens is that can help to improve the intergroup relations. Now, the cooperative task in the movie Remember the Titans is, of course, where the boys have to be on a team together, and they have a common goal of winning a football game and then winning a football season. And so that's the cooperative task. Now, we have to make sure that it's task-oriented, so everybody has a job, and everybody has to kind of work together toward that common goal. So this is a video clip that kind of shows what happens as they're working together toward that common goal in a cooperative group. And you'll see how the intergroup relations and the tensions have died down.
We are changed. We're going to change the way we run. We're going to change the way we eat. We're going to change the way we block. We're going to change the way we tackle. We're going to change the way we win. Defense is desire.
Take a lesson from the dead. If we don't come together right now on this hollow ground, we too will be destroyed.
Now here's this authority figure telling them that they need to come together and have more positive relationship.
Just like they. I don't care if you like each other or not, but you will respect each other. And maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll learn to play this game like men.
All right, you really stuck him, Campbell. Yeah, I love me a little contact, Petey. Left side. Wrong side. Left side. Left side. Left side. Left side. Let me ask you something, Mr. Campbell. What kind of power you got?
Oh, man, you know I got some soul power.
What kind of power you got?
I got a question of that. I got soul power.
Yes, you do.
Right on, let me ask you something. you demanded perfection. Now, I ain't saying that I'm perfect, because I'm not. And I ain't gonna never be. None of us are. But we have won every single game we have played till now. So this team is perfect. We stepped out on that field that way tonight. And if it's all the same to you, Coach Boone, that's how we want to leave it.
No, I don't want them to gain another yard.
You blitz all day. If they cross the line of scrimmage, I'm going to take every last one of you out. You make sure they remember forever the night they played the Titans. Leave those down.
So do you think that Walt Disney, I shouldn't say Walt Disney, but the Disney people, do you know what I mean, that wrote Remember the Titans, do you think they read a social psychology book to put all of these things into one movie? It's very easy for us to sit here and say, well, that was a movie, okay? All those things worked out because it was a movie, and that's why intergroup relations got better. But there are actually social psychologists who have studied this in research studies. Gordon Allport in 1954 did a study, and his study was called the Robbers Cave Experiment. So I'm going to ask that you watch skip ad, here we go.
Today,
that you watch what happened in the Robbers Cave Experiment and take notes on how the experiment was set up and what happened with the intergroup relations in this experiment.
Robbers Cave. In 1954, a group of 11 boys, all about 12 years old, were invited to a special summer camp in the deep woods of southeastern Oklahoma, at a place called Robbers Cave State Park. None of the boys knew each other, although they all came from similar backgrounds. They spent their days bonding over things like games and swimming and treasure hunts, and in no time, they formed a tight, friendly group. They even came up with a name for themselves, the Rattlers. But soon they began to notice something. No, not a guy in the woods with a hockey mask. There was another group of boys, also 11 of them, also the same age, that had been staying at the other end of the park the whole time. The Rattlers never interacted with these other boys, so they didn't know that those kids were also spending time bonding over games and swimming and treasure hunts, and that they'd come up with a name for themselves too, the Eagles. But the Rattlers didn't like the look of the Eagles. Oh no, they didn't like them using their baseball diamond or their dining hall, and the feeling was mutual. It didn't take long for each group to start complaining to the camp's counselors about the other gang, and eventually they both said that they wanted to set up a contest to determine once and for all which group was better. The counselors were only too happy to comply, because as I'm sure you figured out by now, those counselors were actually researchers. The man who set up what would be remembered as the Robbers Cave Experiment was Turkish-American social psychologist Muzafer Sharif. He was interested in what it would take for rivals to overcome their differences and resolve their conflicts. Specifically, Sharif wanted to test something called realistic conflict theory. He hypothesized that conflict happens when you combine negative prejudices with competition over resources, and the boys at Robbers Cave were well on their way to proving him right. Over the next couple of days, the Rattlers and the Eagles competed against each other for prizes in a series of games like tug-of-war and foot races. And soon, what started as your basic trash-talking and taunting and name-calling morphed into fistfights, thefts, and raids on each other's cabins. But then their dynamics changed, or were changed for them. After the games were over, the researchers integrated the groups and gave the kids shared goals that they could only achieve through cooperation. The tide quickly turned. All 22 boys worked together to move a stalled truck that was carrying their food. They took care of a partially felled tree that was deemed a danger to the camp. They collaborated in setting up tents, even though they weren't given complete sets of equipment. While isolation and competition made enemies of the strangers, shared goals and cooperation turned enemies into friends. Over the past 39 weeks, we've learned a lot about ourselves, our emotions and our personalities, how our minds can get sick, how we can help them get well again.
Okay. So, as you can see here, Oh, and by the way, I said this wrong. The Robbers Cave experiment was not done by Gordon Allport. Gordon Allport, I'm sorry. He is the one who said these were all of the ways to improve intergroup relations, and then that was tested by the Robbers Cave experiment. My bad. Okay, so anyways, you can see here that by conducting these types of tasks in the Robbers Cave experiments, the intergroup relations were improved. And there's been several other repeated studies by several other different social psychologists to show that. Now, that ends our discussion about this. So you want to think about ways to reduce prejudice and make sure that you know that list. And also that you understand the learning target for today, what leads to stereotypes and prejudice. Now, speaking of that, there's been some other studies out there to try to determine other factors that influence the development of prejudice. And that's what this article is about. Is intelligence related to prejudice and political beliefs? So at this point in time, you'll want to end this video and go to your Edmodo library into the Social Psychology Unit folder, and there is the reading on intelligence and how it's related to prejudice and political beliefs. And see for yourself if you agree with the research that was done and discussed in this article as being a factor for prejudice. All right, so that leads us to the end of this learning target. I hope that your vacation is going well and that you're having a safe and happy holiday season. All right, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Get ready for one more video after this, and one from Schuler too. All right, see ya.